Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. They called it the House of Ashes, a mansion long abandoned, its walls blackened by fire and its memories buried in soot. But when a gathering takes place to mark its tragic past, the night ends in terror. One guest doesn't leave alive. Murder in the House of Ashes is a tale born from ruin and whispered regrets. As the flames of the past flicker to life once more, Hercule Poirot steps into a world of charred secrets, guilt, and revenge. Each room holds a memory best forgotten. Each shadow hides a name best unspoken. As the investigation deepens, Poirot realizes that the fire that once consumed the house never truly died. It only waited to burn again. Stay with us till the final ember fades, for the truth in this house is as deadly as its ashes. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales, where every story rises from the smoke of mystery. Chapter 1: The Fire That Spoke. The night was painted red. Flames clawed at the sky, curling like the hands of the damned as the great country estate of Ashbourne Hall burned from within. Smoke rolled through the valley, black and thick, carrying the scent of old wood, polish, and secrets that refused to stay buried. At the far end of the gravel drive, two men stood side by side. One, the local constable, trembling with disbelief. The other, perfectly composed, eyes gleaming in the flicker of the inferno. It was Poirot. He watched as the roof gave way with a thunderous roar, the embers spiraling upward like dying stars. His small frame was outlined against the light, calm yet calculating, his gaze fixed not on the destruction, but on the story behind it. The constable cleared his throat. "Sir, we've confirmed one casualty so far, a man found in what used to be the study. But there's no trace of anyone else." Poirot's voice was steady, low, and deliberate. "One man dies, and yet the house burns as if to erase a lifetime. Tell me, constable, who owned this fine place?" "Mr. Leonard Ashbourne, sir. Retired judge. Lived here with his niece, Clara. She's not been found yet." Poirot nodded slowly. His eyes drifted toward the shattered windows. "Then we must be certain whether she is missing or hidden." He stepped forward, careful on the wet gravel, his shoes reflecting the dying glow of the fire. The world around them hissed as the flames met the rain, small drops that had come too late to save the house. As the firemen fought the last pockets ablaze, Poirot's gaze caught a strange glimmer inside the ruin. Something metallic, something deliberate. "Constable," he said softly, "have the men clear that debris near the eastern wall." Within minutes, they revealed what looked like the corner of a small iron box, scorched but intact. Poirot crouched, brushing off the ash with a handkerchief. Inside lay charred fragments of paper, letters perhaps, or a will, and the faint outline of a gold key. He looked at it for a long moment before rising. "This was no ordinary fire," he murmured. "It was a confession written in flame." By dawn, only the skeleton of Ashbourne Hall remained. The gardens were slick with soot and water, the marble statues cracked and leaning like weary sentinels. Poirot stood beneath the ruined archway as the constable returned, hat in hand. "They've confirmed the dead man, sir. It's Leonard Ashbourne himself. No one else inside." Poirot's brow furrowed. And yet, someone started the fire. It was not Mr. Ashbourne. His body shows no sign of movement. He was dead before the blaze began. The constable blinked. "How can you be sure?" Poirot gestured toward the stretchers being carried out. "His lungs are clean. There is no soot, no smoke inside. He did not breathe as the fire burned. He was already gone." A shiver ran down the constable's back. "You're saying someone murdered him first, then set the fire?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Yes, my friend, and they did it not to kill, but to conceal." Later that morning, as the smoke thinned, a young woman appeared at the edge of the field, her face pale beneath a black cloak. She moved slowly, trembling, clutching something to her chest. Poirot turned as she approached. "Miss Claire Ashbourne, I presume?" She nodded faintly. Her voice was soft, breaking. "I came as soon as I heard. Uncle Leonard, he can't be gone." Poirot studied her carefully, not her tears, but her hands. They were spotless. No ash, no soot, no cuts. She had not been near the fire. Yet she carried a small wooden box. "What do you hold there, Miss Ashbourne?" She looked down. "It's his music box. I keep it for comfort. He loved this tune." She opened it. A faint melody filled the air, slow and haunting, almost drowned by the hiss of the rain. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And where were you last night?" Her lips trembled. "In the village. I stayed with a friend. She stopped, her eyes flicking toward the smoking ruins. "We argued before I left," she whispered. "He said terrible things. But I never thought, I never imagined." Poirot's voice was calm. "Murderers often rely on imagination, Miss Ashbourne, but they cannot hide from reason." He let her go with the constable, though his gaze followed the music box long after she disappeared from sight. There was something about that melody, something discordant, a note that did not belong. By afternoon, Poirot walked the ground alone. The rain had washed away much of the soot, but certain things could not be erased. Footprints near the garden wall, a broken lantern half buried in mud, and something stranger still, a small piece of black glass lodged between the stones. He lifted it carefully with a penknife. It wasn't glass. It was a shard of obsidian, a kind of volcanic stone used in old seals, or sometimes mirrors. He frowned. Why would such a thing be found here at a modern estate? Inside the remains of the study, the smell of charred paper lingered. On the wall behind the desk, the fire had burned unevenly, leaving a strange pattern, circular, almost like the outline of clock. Poirot tilted his head, a clock that no longer existed. He turned toward the desk, or what was left of it. In one drawer, half melted by the heat, lay something unexpected, a small photograph. Two men, standing together in front of the very same house. One was Leonard Ashbourne. The other, a man with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. On the back, in faded ink, "To Leonard, may truth always serve you well." The signature below had been burned away. Poirot slipped the photo into his coat pocket. "Truth," he murmured, and yet truth has burned with him. Evening came, bringing with it a gray silence. The last of the officials departed, leaving Poirot alone by the edge of the ruins. The constable approached one final time. "Sir, we'll secure the site tonight. Anything else you need before we clear out?" Poirot turned to him with a small nod. "One thing. Keep a man posted near the woods. Whoever did this will return, not for guilt, but for something left behind." The constable frowned. "What makes you say that?" Poirot looked back at the shattered remains of Ashbourne Hall. The fire destroyed much, but not everything. There was something in this house they needed gone. Yet if they missed it, he looked down at the golden key he had found that morning. They will come back for it. That night, the moon broke through the clouds. The ruins of Ashbourne Hall stood silent, steaming in the damp chill. Poirot, wrapped in his coat, waited inside the tent the fireman had erected, a small lamp beside him, the key glinting in its light. Hours passed. The wind sighed through the broken walls like a whisper. And then a sound, a footstep, soft, deliberate. Poirot moved not at all. His hand rested on the lamp. Another sound, fabric brushing against stone. Someone was here. He turned the lamp slightly, casting its light across the rubble. A shadow moved along the far wall, thin, cautious, dressed in dark clothes. The figure knelt near the eastern corner, reaching into the debris. Searching, Poirot stepped forward, the gravel crunching underfoot. "Good evening," he said softly. The figure froze, then bolted. Poirot shouted for the constable, But the figure was fast, darting between the columns, leaping over the low wall, vanishing into the trees. The constable ran up moments later, breathless. What happened? Poirot held up the lamp. They came for what was hidden, but they did not find it. He looked toward the dark woods. They will try again. Murderers always do when they fail the first time. The next morning, Poirot visited the local inn where Miss Ashbourne was staying. She sat by the window, pale and sleepless. The music box rested beside her cup of untouched tea. "You did not sleep, Miss Ashbourne?" "No. I keep hearing the house burn. Every time I close my eyes." Poirot sat opposite her, his gaze resting on the box. "You loved your uncle?" "Of course I did. He raised me after my parents died. And yet, you quarreled with him last night." Her eyes widened. How do you—" "Your words, mademoiselle. You told me. It was over what?" She hesitated. Then softly, "An inheritance." He said I was not ready to manage it, that I was being deceived by someone. I thought he meant my fiancé, but— She stopped herself. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Your fiancé?" Henry Doyle. He works in London. Uncle never trusted him." Poirot said nothing for a moment. Then he asked quietly, "When did you last see this Henry Doyle?" "2 nights ago, before the fire." She nodded, her hands trembling again. "He came to speak to my uncle. I don't know what they said, but Henry left angry. I saw him outside. He wouldn't tell me why." Poirot's gaze darkened. "And you did not see him since?" "No." Poirot stood slowly. "Then perhaps it is time that I do." That afternoon, Poirot stood in the ruins once more. The sunlight had broken through the clouds, but only made the blackened walls seem crueler. He held the golden key in one hand, the photograph in the other. 2 men in front of the house. A burned signature. A locked box. And a niece whose fiancé vanished the day before the fire. He placed the key against the lockbox again. This time it turned. Inside lay a folded page, protected by a thin metal case. He opened it carefully. It was a letter, the handwriting elegant but trembling. "If anything should happen to me, seek the truth beneath the floor of the study. The fire cannot burn what is already in the earth. Leonard Ashbourne." Poirot looked up sharply. The floor of the study. He moved quickly, calling for the constable. Together, they lifted the charred boards and dug into the soil beneath. Within minutes, they uncovered a small tin container, blackened but sealed tight. Poirot pried it open. Inside were documents, bank records, letters, and a single deed, all bearing the name Henry Doyle. A quiet triumph flickered in Poirot's eyes. The dead do speak, constable, but sometimes they choose fire as their voice. He stood, the wind tugging at his coat as the valley stretched silent before him. Somewhere beyond the trees, a murderer was waiting, believing the fire had erased everything. Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes fixed on the distant woods. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "the ashes will speak again." Chapter 2, Echoes Beneath the Ashes. Morning light crept across the blackened bones of Ashbourne Hall. The mist hung low over the grounds, wrapping the ruins in silence, as if the world itself held its breath. Poirot stood at the edge of what had once been the study, his gloved hands resting behind his back. The golden key glinted faintly in his pocket. The constable approached, his boots sinking into the soft earth. "Sir," the men finished searching the floor. "Nothing more down there." Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the burned timbers. "There is always something more. It depends only on where one looks." He crouched, his eyes scanning the ground. The soil was disturbed, yes, but uneven. Not by their digging, by something before. He picked up a small stone, turned it in his fingers, and let it drop. "Someone else dug here before us," he said quietly, "and they did not finish." The constable frowned. Meaning they were interrupted. Poirot straightened slowly, brushing the dust from his sleeve. The letter said, "The fire cannot burn what is already in the earth." That was not written for me. It was written for someone else, someone Leonard Ashbourne trusted to find it. He must have feared the fire before it began. Later that morning, Poirot and the constable made their way to the village. The air was cold and damp. The smell of smoke still lingered. At the small inn, Clara Ashbourne sat by the window once again, pale and silent. The music box sat beside her, its lid closed this time. She looked up as they entered. "Did you find anything?" Poirot nodded. "Your uncle was a man of foresight. He left behind more than ashes." He sat opposite her. "Miss Ashbourne, when your uncle and Mr. Doyle last spoke, did you hear any part of their conversation?" She hesitated. "Only a little. Henry was shouting about something about a promise. He said Uncle Leonard betrayed him." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Did he mention what promise?" "No, but my uncle said something that frightened me. He said, 'I know what you did 10 years ago.'" Henry went white. Then he left without another word. Poirot leaned back, his expression unreadable. "10 years ago," he repeated softly. "Your uncle was still serving as a judge then, yes?" "Yes." "Tell me, Miss Ashbourne, was there any case from that time that involved your fiancé?" She frowned. I don't know. Henry never spoke of his past. He said he worked in business. He came into money suddenly a few years ago, but you never asked where it came from." Her silence was answer enough. Poirot rose, his tone still gentle. "Then we must find out for you, Miss Ashbourne, for your peace and for your safety." By afternoon, Poirot had returned to London. He spent hours at the courthouse archives, combing through records of cases presided over by Judge Leonard Ashbourne. Dust clung to the air. Shelves groaned beneath decades of justice and injustice bound in brittle pages. And there, in a file from a decade earlier, he found it. The State versus Henry Doyle, charged with fraud and perjury. Acquitted due to insufficient evidence. Judge Leonard Ashbourne. Poirot traced a finger along the judge's signature. So they had known each other long before. The supposed fiancé had once stood trial before the man who would become his bride's guardian. He read on. The case had involved a missing sum from a charitable fund, money meant for widows of the war. Someone had falsified records. The amount, £20,000, never recovered. Poirot closed the file slowly. It was not the amount that mattered. It was the wound. That evening, Poirot returned to the village. The lamps along the road flickered weakly in the fog. The constable met him near the station. "We've checked Doyle's London flat, sir. Empty. Neighbors say he hasn't been seen since yesterday morning." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Then he runs. The question is from guilt or from fear." As they walked, a young boy ran up from the post office, clutching a telegram. "For you, sir. Just arrived." Poirot took it, unfolding the thin paper. Message intercepted, addressed to Clara Ashbourne. "Do not speak to anyone. Leave village tonight. I will come for you." "Ash!" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Too late," he murmured. "The spider reaches for its web." He handed the note to the constable. "Keep watch on the inn. If he comes, we must be ready." Night fell hard. The village slept under a heavy sky. Inside the inn, Clara sat awake, the music box open once again, the tune whispering through the stillness. Poirot sat in the adjoining room, a lamp burning low. He waited. He had told her to leave the window slightly open, just enough for the wind to move the curtains, just enough to make the illusion of solitude. Time passed. Midnight. Then a shadow. Outside the window, a figure crept along the wall, careful, silent. A gloved hand reached through the gap, sliding the window upward. The figure climbed in, moving toward the bed, and froze. Poirot's voice came out of the darkness. "I would not take another step, Mr. Doyle." The man turned sharply. Tall, thin, his face drawn by sleepless nights. His eyes darted to the door, but Poirot's silhouette blocked it. "Sit down," Poirot said quietly. "We must talk before the constable arrives." Doyle hesitated. Then, With a bitter laugh, he sat. So you figured out. Poirot tilted his head. I have figured out many things, but not all. You will help me with the rest. For a moment, there was only the sound of the ticking clock. Then Doyle spoke, his voice low, rough. He wouldn't stop tormenting me. Leonard Ashbourne. He knew about my past. I was acquitted, yes, but he never believed I was innocent. Every time I came near Clara, he reminded me what he could do to ruin me. Poirot's tone was calm. And yet you came to his house the night he died. Doyle's eyes flickered. I only wanted him to stop, to give me peace. I begged him to destroy the files. He refused, said he'd expose me to Clara if I ever married her. And so, Poirot said softly, you killed him. Doyle shook his head violently. No, I swear I didn't. I left that night furious, yes, but alive. He was alive when I walked out. I was halfway to the station when I saw the glow on the hill. I knew the house was burning. I didn't go back. I couldn't. Because you feared the truth would burn with him? Doyle's voice broke. Because I thought someone wanted me framed for it. Poirot studied him for a long moment. His eyes saw no madness, only exhaustion. Tell me, Mr. Doyle, he said quietly, who else knew about those files? Doyle hesitated. Only his solicitor. And Clara. Clara. He nodded. She was with me once when I tried to reason with him. She heard enough to know the past could destroy everything. Poirot's eyes darkened, and she stood to inherit his entire estate. Doyle stiffened. You think she... Poirot raised a hand. I think nothing. Yet, an hour later, Doyle was in custody, though not yet charged. The constable, weary and uncertain, leaned against the station desk. You believe him, sir? Poirot adjusted his coat. I believe he speaks from fear, not deceit, which makes him useful, for now. He turned to the window, watching dawn touch the mist. But we are still missing one piece, constable. One ember among the ashes. He reached into his pocket and drew out the small shard of obsidian he had found near the ruins. It glimmered faintly in the morning light. Do you know what this is? The constable shook his head. It is volcanic glass, sharp as truth, often used in mirrors, centuries ago, or in trinkets. But here, in this house, it was part of something newer, perhaps something decorative, perhaps something that held a secret. He turned it over in his fingers. Why would such a fragment be found in the study, unless it came from an object smashed during the fire? And if it was smashed, why? He pocketed it again, because someone wanted to destroy a reflection. That afternoon, Poirot visited the ruins once more. The air was dry, the ground brittle. The silence felt heavier now, as if the house mourned its secrets. He walked to the study, tracing the line of the scorched wall where the clock's shape had appeared. There, buried in the soot, he found it, a circular metal frame, melted on one side, the back of it shattered glass. A mirror. He lifted it carefully. The back had a hidden latch. Inside was a compartment, empty now, but large enough for letters, documents, or blackmail material. Poirot smiled faintly. So, Leonard, you hid your conscience behind your own reflection. Back at the inn, he found Clara again, pacing the corridor. They've taken Henry, she said immediately. You can't believe he did it. Poirot's expression remained composed. I believe only in what can be proven. And proof, Miss Ashbourne, is hidden in strange places. He showed her the mirror frame. This hung in your uncle's study, did it not? She nodded slowly. Yes, above the fireplace. Poirot opened the latch. Did you know it concealed a compartment? Her eyes widened. No. Then tell me, who would? She stared at the empty space inside. Maybe his solicitor, or the housekeeper. She's been with us for years. Poirot tilted his head. Where is she now? I don't know. She left yesterday morning. She said she was going to her sister's. Poirot smiled thinly. How convenient. He found the housekeeper, Mrs. Lyle, 2 villages away, sitting on a bench outside a church, a suitcase at her feet. Her hands trembled when she saw him. "You've come about the fire," she whispered. "Yes, Mrs. Lyle," and the truth that burned with it. Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Poirot sat beside her. "Tell me." She swallowed hard. "I knew about Mr. Doyle. I knew what he'd done years ago. The judge made me promise to keep silent. But when he said he was going to expose the man, I panicked. I thought it would destroy Clara. She loves that man. She'd never recover. And so you set the fire?" Her voice cracked. "No, I only meant to scare him. I lit the curtains in the study after he fell asleep. I thought he'd wake up, I thought." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "After he fell asleep?" "Yes. He said he was tired. I left the room. When I came back, the fire had spread. I tried to drag him out, but he didn't move. He was already gone." Poirot's tone hardened. "You mean he was already dead?" She stared at him, realizing what she had confessed. Tears streaked her face. "I don't know who killed him. I only know that when I touched him, he was cold." Poirot stood slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Lyle. You have told me everything you know, and much that you do not realize you know." Chapter 3. The Man Who Should Have Died. The afternoon light slanted across the valley like pale glass. The ruins of Ashbourne Hall were quiet now, fenced off and watched by crows that circled lazily above the blackened roof beams. Poirot stood at the edge of the field with the constable, the wind tugging at his coat. In his pocket lay Mrs. Lyle's confession, neatly written in her trembling hand. The constable looked uneasy. "So that's it, then? She admits to starting the fire." Poirot shook his head slowly. "She started the blaze, yes, but she did not start the death." Mrs. Lyle lit the curtains. Another hand stilled the judge's heart before a single match was struck. He turned toward the road leading to the village. "We must find Henry Doyle." The judge had gathered proof against him. He would not have stayed silent for long. The following morning, a gray mist hung over the railway station 2 villages away. Poirot waited beside the ticket window, a folded newspaper tucked beneath his arm. The paper carried a small notice about the fire, nothing more. Yet that morning, the clerk remembered something. "There was a gentleman here yesterday," he told Poirot. "Tall, dark hair, hurried. Bought a ticket to London on the evening train. Name on the receipt, Doyle." Poirot nodded once. "Did he speak to anyone?" The clerk thought for a moment. "Only to ask if the train would be delayed. Said he had urgent business. Left before it pulled out, though. Never boarded." "Never boarded," Poirot repeated quietly. "And no one has seen him since." He stared down the length of the empty platform. Somewhere out there, Henry Doyle was running. But from what? From guilt, or for something worse? By noon, Poirot was seated in the small inn parlor where Clara Ashbourne had been staying. The curtains were drawn tight, shutting out the weak sun. Clara sat opposite him, eyes red from sleeplessness. "You've spoken to Mrs. Lyle?" she asked. "Yes," Poirot replied. "She confirmed the fire began by her hand, but not the death. Tell me, Miss Ashbourne, when you spoke to Mr. Doyle before the tragedy, did he mention any quarrel with your uncle?" Her fingers twisted the handkerchief in her lap. "He said my uncle accused him of theft, of stealing money that wasn't his. But Henry swore it was only a misunderstanding." Poirot's tone stayed gentle. "Did your uncle ever show you proof?" "No. He said he would speak to me after dinner that night." "But then the fire." Poirot studied her face. She looked frightened, yes, but also uncertain, as if she feared what the truth might cost her more than the murder itself. "There is something else, is there not?" he said quietly. Clara's gaze dropped. "The night before he died, Uncle received a letter. He burned it in the fireplace. I asked what it was. He said, 'Old ghosts should stay dead.' That's all." "Old ghosts," Poirot murmured. Perhaps one of them wore the name Henry Doyle. That evening, Poirot sat alone in his rented room at the inn, papers spread across the table. The photograph of 2 men before the house, the burnt letter, the bank documents. The lamplight trembled across the pages like a pulse. He compared signatures, trace dates. The oldest paper, an investment contract, was from 20 years ago. It listed a partner's name that caught his eye. H. Donald. Not Doyle. Donald. He leaned closer. Ink faded, but readable. He whispered the letters aloud. H-D-O-N-E-L. Rearranged, it spelled Henry Doyle. A false name. Poirot straightened slowly. The man had changed his identity. But why? He turned the photo over again. The half-burned inscription read, "To Leonard, may truth always serve you well." The signature was gone, but faint traces of ink formed two letters. H.D. The same initials. The same man. So the judge and Henry Doyle had known each other long before Clara ever met him. And whatever had happened between them, it had ended with death in the ashes. Poirot left the inn at dawn, following the narrow road toward the marshes beyond the next village. Locals said an abandoned hunting lodge stood there, a place Henry Doyle sometimes used when he wanted to be alone. The path wound through dead reeds and frost-stiffened grass. When Poirot reached the lodge, the door hung slightly open. Inside, dust lay thick across the table. But in the hearth, fresh ashes still smoked. Someone had been there recently. He moved quietly, eyes sweeping the room. On the mantel lay a stack of letters tied with ribbon. Each bore the same initials, H. D. And each was signed with a name that chilled him. Harold Donald. He opened the first. The paper smelled of salt and age. "Leonard, you ruined me once. You took my name, my work, my future. I will take from you what you cherish most. You will die as you made me live, alone and despised." Poirot closed the letter carefully. There was no need to read the rest. The truth had waited 20 years in silence, and now it spoke with fire. He turned toward the door and stopped. Someone was standing there. Henry Doyle. He looked nothing like the charming young man Clara had described. His clothes were torn, his eyes sunken, his face drawn and gray. Yet there was still something defiant in the way he held himself. "So," Doyle said softly, "the great detective found me." Poirot didn't move. "You are not difficult to find. Guilt leaves clearer tracks than feet." Doyle laughed once, a hollow sound. "You think I killed him?" "I think," Poirot said evenly, "that you had reason to. The judge knew who you were. Harold Donald, the partner he ruined in a case of fraud 20 years ago. You reinvented yourself. You courted his niece. And when he uncovered the truth, you silenced him." Doyle's smile faded. "You don't understand. I wanted to face him, yes, but not to kill him. I wanted him to admit what he'd done. He stole everything from me. My company, my reputation. I only wanted him to tell Clara the truth, that her uncle wasn't the saint she believed." Poirot studied him. "Then why run?" "Because when I went back that night," Doyle said, voice breaking, "he was already dead. The fire started after I left. I swear it." "Then tell me," Poirot pressed, "why did you return at all?" Doyle sank into a chair, covering his face. "He sent me a note. Said he wanted to make peace. I came to the hall around 9. The study door was open. He was slumped over the desk. I thought he was drunk or asleep. When I touched him, he was cold. I panicked. I saw the papers on the desk, my name, my old name, and I burned them in the fireplace. I didn't mean to hide the truth. I just couldn't let Clara see what he'd written about me." Poirot's eyes softened, but only slightly. "And no one saw you?" "No. I left by the garden door. That's all." Poirot looked around the dim lodge. "Then someone else entered the study after you. Someone who saw the chance to turn your guilt into their cover." He picked up one of the half-burned letters and held it toward Doyle. "This handwriting yours?" Doyle nodded slowly. Poirot tucked it into his coat. "Then you will come with me. Not as a prisoner, but as a witness. The true murderer still walks free." By dusk, Poirot and Doyle were back at the ruins. The constable waited with a small group of workers clearing debris. Clara stood nearby, wrapped in a dark shawl, her expression unreadable. When she saw Doyle, she stepped back. "Henry, what are you doing here?" "Trying to tell the truth," he said quietly. Your uncle wasn't the man you thought. Her eyes filled with anger and disbelief. Stop, please. You've done enough. Poirot stepped between them. Miss Ashbourne, I must ask you to listen. The man you loved once called himself Harold Donald. Your uncle and he were business partners. Years ago, the judge accused him of embezzlement. But those records, he pointed toward the tin box, show that it was not Mr. Donald who stole the funds. It was the judge himself. Clara's breath caught. That's not true. It is, Doyle said softly. I can prove it. Poirot continued. The judge feared exposure. When he realized Mr. Doyle was to marry you, he tried to end the engagement by revealing the truth of Henry's past. He thought guilt would frighten you, but instead it trapped him. He turned toward the constable. The judge died from a single blow to the skull. Not smoke, not fire. A heavy object, most likely from his own desk. The constable frowned. We didn't find any weapon. You did, Poirot said. You simply did not recognize it. The music box. Clara's face drained of color. Poirot went on, voice calm but unrelenting. The tune it plays is uneven because one of the gears is bent from the force of the strike. Miss Ashbourne, your fingerprints are on it. She shook her head, backing away. No, I took it after the fire. You took it before, Poirot said. Your uncle's letter warned that old ghosts should stay dead. You realized he meant Henry Doyle. You went to plead with him. He refused. In anger, you struck him. Only once. You thought he would wake. But he did not. Clara's hands trembled. I didn't mean to kill him. I only wanted him to stop. The constable stepped forward, but Poirot raised a hand. She then left the room. Mrs. Lyle entered later, saw the still figure, and in her guilt lit the fire to destroy what she thought was her mistake. The rest, the flames did for them all. For a long moment, the ruins were silent. Only the wind moved through the blackened beams. Clara sank to her knees. I loved him. Even when I hated him, I loved him. Poirot's voice was gentle now. And love, mademoiselle, can be the cruelest of motives. As Clara was led away, Doyle turned to Poirot, face pale. You saved me, he said quietly. Poirot looked toward the valley, where the smoke had finally faded from the air. No, Mr. Doyle, you saved yourself when you stopped lying. He glanced back at the ruins. The fire took a house, but truth took a family. Doyle nodded slowly, tears in his eyes. What will happen to her? She will face what must be faced, Poirot said. But perhaps, in time, she will find peace. Even ashes can grow flowers again. He turned to leave, the last light of the setting sun catching the charred walls behind him, painting them gold for one brief moment before darkness claimed the valley once more. Chapter 4, Ashes Tell No Lies. The ruins of Ashbourne Hall groaned in the night wind. Smoke no longer rose from the blackened chimneys, but the scent of burning wood still haunted the air, clinging to every broken beam and shattered window. The great house was dead, yet it whispered. Poirot stood beneath what had once been the grand staircase. His shoes crunched over fragments of glass and ash. His eyes, small and sharp, moved slowly over the ground, as if the earth itself could confess its secrets. Behind him, the constable shivered. Sir, I don't like being here after dark. It feels like the place is watching us. Poirot didn't answer. His gaze had fallen on a single footprint in the dust, a partial print, small, leading toward the remains of the study. He knelt. The light from his lantern cut through the gray haze, landing on the melted brass frame of a clock. It had stopped at 11:47. He whispered to himself. The fire began after midnight, but the clock stopped before it. The constable frowned, meaning the fire wasn't the start of it. Poirot nodded, meaning the killer made sure it was not. Later that evening, Poirot asked for everyone still alive to gather in what remained of the drawing room. The place was ghostly. A single lantern cast weak light across 4 faces. Clara Ashbourne, pale and trembling, Henry Doyle, grim and silent. Mrs. Lyle, exhausted and broken, and Constable Merrick, clutching his notebook as if it were a shield. Poirot stood before them, framed by the ruins of a grand portrait. The judge's face blackened by smoke, but still recognizable. He spoke softly, every word deliberate. "The truth," he said, "is like smoke. It cannot be held forever. It always finds a way to rise." Clara's hands twisted in her lap. "Please, Mr. Poirot, just tell us what happened." Poirot inclined his head. "Very well." He stepped closer to the fire's remains, pointing to a cracked section of the floor. This was not merely a fire. It was a confession written in flame. He turned toward Henry Doyle. "You, Mr. Doyle, had every reason to despise Judge Ashbourne. Years ago, when you were a young clerk, you altered a client's inheritance, not for greed, but for love. You stole to save your father's failing business. The judge discovered your crime and buried it on one condition. You would remain silent. You would owe him everything. And so you did." Henry's jaw tightened. "I paid him back. Every penny. Indeed. But not enough for his pride. He never forgave you. When you became engaged to his daughter, he saw not love, but betrayal. He intended to expose you on the morning of the wedding. I found the letter he had already written." Clara gasped, turning toward Henry. "You told me he approved." Henry's face went pale. "I thought he'd changed his mind." Poirot's voice cut through his words. "You knew he would not. You visited him that night, did you not?" Henry looked away. "Yes. We argued. He told me I didn't deserve Clara. I left." Poirot stepped forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You left and came back." Henry's silence was an answer. Poirot went on. "You returned through the study door. You found him asleep at his desk. You thought to frighten him, to beg once more. But something changed. Perhaps it was the years of humiliation, perhaps it was fear. The pistol was on his desk. You took it." Clara covered her mouth. "No." "You fired once," Poirot said, his tone calm, almost sorrowful. "The bullet entered just below the collarbone. He died instantly. You panicked. You left the weapon beside him and fled." Moments later, Mrs. Lyle entered the room. Mrs. Lyle's hands trembled. "I thought he was asleep. I swear I didn't see the blood until the fire caught." Poirot nodded. "You meant only to burn the papers that would destroy him. You did not know he was already gone. You lit the match and sealed the truth in smoke." Silence fell. The house creaked around them, as if the very walls were breathing. Poirot turned to Clara. "You asked me earlier if your father suffered. I will tell you what he did suffer: pride, arrogance, and guilt. He destroyed lives in the name of justice, and it returned to him as fire." Clara's eyes glistened. "And Henry?" Poirot's expression softened. "He must answer for what he has done. There is no other way." Henry spoke then, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean to kill him. I only wanted him to understand. He said I wasn't worthy, and maybe he was right." Poirot looked at him for a long time. "A man who kills to defend love destroys the very thing he hoped to protect." Henry turned to Clara, but she could not look at him. Her tears fell silently into the ash. The constable stepped forward. "Sir, should I take him?" Poirot nodded once. "Yes, Constable Merrick. But let him walk, not be dragged. Some ghosts deserve to meet the dawn with dignity." Henry lowered his head and followed the constable out into the night. The faint glow of lanterns faded into the distance, swallowed by fog. Poirot remained standing in the ruins long after they had gone. The lantern flickered beside him, its light trembling across the blackened stones. He spoke softly, almost to himself. The fire burned the house, but not the truth. That it only revealed. He glanced toward the cracked portrait of the judge. Its eyes were gone, lost to flame. "Justice," Poirot murmured, "has many faces. Tonight, it wore the face of a man who could not forgive and a man who could not forget." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the hollow hall. Outside, dawn crept over the hills, gray, silent, cold. The house of ashes stood behind him, broken but at peace. In the stillness, the first bird began to sing. A single note, rising through smoke and memory. Poirot paused at the gate and looked back one last time. "The case is over," he said quietly, "but the ashes will remember." He walked on, his figure fading into the mist. If you were drawn into this mystery, if you felt the chill of secrets buried in smoke and the weight of truth in the ashes, then stay with us. Like, subscribe, and return again for the next case of Hercule Poirot, where every whisper hides a lie, and every lie leaves behind its shadow